Hey groupers, Pastor Marshall. Well, our last message on finances, and then we get to start our Christmas series, which I'm really looking forward to. We're going to do some apologetics work and talk about the proof of Christmas. Well, before that, we want to talk about debt. I shared with you my most humiliating story when I had to call my father-in-law because the church couldn't afford to pay us, and then when he asked me that difficult question, well, how much credit card debt do you have? And most humiliating conversation I've ever had. I wonder if you can identify in your own story a most humiliating moment. It might not be like mine, but can you share with your group members story from your life? What would be one of your most humiliating stories? And then after you've talked about that and everybody's still kind of warming up their whistles, also think about this. Was there ever a time that you spent money before the check arrived or before the direct deposit arrived? When is sometime in your life that you have spent money that you were expecting to come? Maybe it didn't come. I wonder if you'd share about that. Well, we're looking at the story of Abraham and Sarah and Ishmael and Hagar to help us see this in a clear perspective. So turn back to Genesis. And in Genesis 15:4, what did God promise Abraham? And how did Abraham respond in Genesis 15:6? And what did God and Abraham do immediately following? Just skim the rest of chapter 15. And then we bleed into chapter 16. And do you think that Sarai, or Sarah, we're just going to call her that going forward, do you think that Sarah didn't believe in God's promise? Or do you think that she understood the promise to only apply to Abraham and not to apply to her? This is in Genesis 16:1 and 2. Well, the great thing about this message is, about this passage is, what was the result of Sarah and Abraham cashing this check about a baby being born to them? What was the results of them cashing this check early? What was the results of them getting ahead of God? What was the results for their family? What is the result in the region? And then what is the result in history? What did God do to clarify his promise to Abraham and Sarah in chapter 17? Specifically, look at verse 16. What was Abraham's response in 17:17? And then fast forward all the way to 18:12. And what was Sarah's response in Genesis 18:12? And do you read Abraham's response in 17:7 and Sarah's response in 18:12? Do you read those as the same, or do you read those as different? How do you interpret their response? I want to know what are the results of. I shared with you some scriptures on Sunday, 3 specifically. We looked at Proverbs 22:7. We looked at Deuteronomy 28:12, and we looked at Matthew 6:24. So look at those 3 scriptures again, and then put them all together in kind of a bundle. And putting them together, how do you think that God feels about financial indebtedness? How does God feel about financial debt? Well, that leads us to our application, and every week I just try to remind you. And so our application is that we would begin what Dave Ramsey calls the debt snowball, that you would take all of the money that you can and take your smallest debt and pay it off as quickly as possible. And then whatever you were paying on that one, its minimum and all the extra that you could afford, start paying that on the next smallest and the next smallest, until when you get to that biggest debt, you'll have a big sum of money. All of those minimum payments combined, you'll have a big sum of money to begin to pay it off quickly. That's your application, debt snowball. Well, we're not throwing any snowballs, but Christmas is upon us. I look forward to seeing you next week as we begin to talk about the shepherds and the proof that they bring to us. God bless.